So the purpose of this event today is to share an innovative research conducted by the members of the WMC network on psychosocial impacts of peacebuilding on women mediators, the ways in which women mediators have shown remarkable resilience, and recommendations on how to best provide psychosocial support to mediators and peacebuilders. Most processes, as we know, lack this support, which has direct implications on the process results. We very much look forward to hearing from our expert members, mediators, to speak about this issue in more detail during the event. Women Mediators across the Commonwealth network is currently hosted by Conciliation Resources, and the network is pleased to be currently supported by the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. We are pleased to have a message from Lord Ahmad, Minister of State in the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office and a long-time champion of the network to kickstart this event.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really welcome this new report, which shines a light on the challenges women mediators face in their tireless work, in your tireless work around the world. May I firstly thank you for all you do to make a positive impact in a world where there are too many people suffering through conflict, through crises, and indeed inequality. The importance of your work spanning more than 50 countries cannot be overstated. You step in when negotiations are stuck and stagnated, and work in some of the most hostile environments to deliver incredible peace-building initiatives. From your wonderful efforts, which I've seen in Cyprus to bring communities together that are divided because of differences in politics or through history, or the work you've done to build trust in Niger to resolve and prevent conflicts, and also the work you're currently doing in Haiti, where you're trying to find a pathway towards peace, a pathway towards ensuring fair and just elections. Your example, your resilience in the face of significant challenges at the negotiating table is frankly beyond impressive. It is very much inspiring to so many. You continue to make a profound difference to many lives, thanks to your courage, tenacity, and indeed your expertise. This new report serves as a reminder that our peace process must be inclusive, and that psychosocial support is as important for mediators as it is for the communities they are serving. I've been a steadfast supporter of the women mediators in the Commonwealth. Indeed, I launched this very network back in 2018, and I've watched your network grow and flourish. You play a vital role in the government's efforts to build peace, to strengthen security and promote equality. And let me assure you of this, that I'm absolutely committed to ensuring you have the support necessary to continue your vital work, indeed to thrive. And I do hope this event provides an opportunity to lift your heads briefly from your work and find in your colleagues the solidarity, the togetherness that will help you sustain you through difficult times. On behalf of myself, indeed the Foreign Secretary, I wish you all the very best in your endeavors. Thank you.
Thanks to Minister Lord Ahmad for his encouraging remarks. I would now like to introduce two of the WMC members who will present the research report, and following their presentation, they will invite additional members of the WMC to discuss and share experiences from their mediation work from the field with relations to the topic. Our two presenters of this report today are Sara Cook. Sara Cook is a conflict response specialist who has extensive experience working with people affected by conflict in Northern Ireland and internationally. Her peacebuilding work includes mediation, dialogue, and storytelling encounters between conflict-affected populations, including victims and survivors of violence, security forces, and paramilitaries. Much of her work addresses the psychosocial effects of conflict, including the impact of mediation and peacebuilding work on practitioners. Sara has trained people from over 50 countries, focusing on trauma-informed and resiliency-focused support for conflict-affected population, internally displaced people, and war refugees. Alicia Kuin is our second presenter. Alicia is a mediator and a conflict management practitioner for the Director General Alternative Dispute Resolution with the Canadian federal government. She has facilitated over 800 processes, inclusive of complex multi-party human rights, Indigenous, government, workplace, commercial, and academic conflicts. Alicia is a professor at Osgoode Hall Law School, teaching conflict analysis and process design, and provides dispute resolution presentations and trainings globally. These are just the two of our wonderful peace builders and mediators in the Commonwealth network. So Sara and Alicia, the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Quhramaana, for that warm welcome. And we want to extend that warm welcome to all of you. We're absolutely delighted that you could join us today, and really looking forward to sharing some of the research outcomes from this remarkable piece of work that was undertaken by women mediators across the Commonwealth. Just as we begin, I'd also like to share my thanks to Lord Ahmad for his comments, and to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the staff team who have been so supportive to women mediators across the Commonwealth, not only with funding, but with strategic support as the network has developed and grown over the last number of years. We're very much in appreciation of that ongoing support. I'd also like to thank Conciliation Resources, who serves as the Secretariat for Women Mediators across the Commonwealth, and particular thanks to Kat French and Laura Aumeer for their support in getting this research published and off the ground. I'd like to say a very quick thanks to Rose Kabara, who is the fantastic artist. You'll really enjoy seeing her illustrations as you read the report and as we move through the presentation today. And finally, to Quhramaana Kakar for all of her support and all of her guidance of women mediators across the Commonwealth, and our membership. As we'll discuss in just a few moments, the members have been really integral into this research. And so we want to thank members who are on this call and others who will be watching afterwards, watching the video from other time zones, for all of their support. So today we are going to be talking just briefly about the research outcomes from this piece of research entitled Personal Impact, Professional Resilience, the Psychosocial Implications of Peacebuilding for Women Mediators. And this research really came from a fascinating place. When we were moving in women, peace and security circles, whether we were at the UN or whether we were at various places in different parts of the world supporting women mediators and peace builders, we kept hearing these parallel conversations, these very quiet side conversations in all of these official spaces, where women were really acknowledging, I carry a pretty heavy burden through my work in mediation and peace building, not only because it's very rigorous, difficult work that exposes us to a lot of conflict-based trauma, but also because as a woman, I face kind of an uphill battle in regards to overcoming barriers and really receiving amplification of my voice. And so over and over, we were hearing these conversations, and it really made us wonder, is there something here to explore? Women fight so hard to be at the table that often once they get there, we find that we want to just kind of hold that space and not look vulnerable, not look weak. And yet we were hearing woman after woman from all over the world say, actually, I do carry a disproportionate psychosocial impact from this really important work that I do, that I love, but I carry this with me. And so the research rationale really stemmed from those quiet conversations that were happening all over the world in WPS circles. So what we're coming to understand increasingly in the peacebuilding world and the humanitarian world is that practitioners are really experiencing personal impact, often from secondary trauma, from the things they witness, the things that they see in the field when they're supporting conflict transformation processes. And this is true regardless of gender. This is, of course, not just true for female practitioners, but for practitioners across the gender spectrum. But what we've noticed in certainly the research, but in those conversations that predated the research, is that for women mediators and peace builders, risks in the field, exposure to conflict-related trauma, and then the general pressures of work are then compounded upon by facing gender-based disadvantages. So when we entered into this research, we were really keen to see if we could begin to find meaningful ways of operationalizing UN Security Council Resolution 1325. So as many of us have known, this resolution has been around for several decades, and we're still seeking ways to meaningfully enact this kind of mission of removing barriers to participation with women mediators and peace builders, and increasing participation at all levels of mediation and peace building worldwide. So when we looked at this research, we began to feel that perhaps if we could remove some of the psychosocial barriers, or if we could address those in a much more rigorous way, then we might find practical ways to really start to allow women mediators and peace builders to become active in new ways and to really thrive and remain sustainable in the very important work that they do. So fundamentally, we were asking this research question: in what ways are women mediators and peace builders impacted by our work? And if any, what psychosocial supports would women benefit from accessing? So the research process around that question was fascinating. It was very much embedded within women mediators across the Commonwealth. So this research was led entirely by our membership, and we were comprised of a research team that involved members from each of our main areas of work. So that team was co-led by myself and Alicia, who's going to be sharing with us in just a moment. And it was comprised of several members who are going to be speaking today: Elizabeth Solomon, Atia Anwer Zoon, Dedziro Nengu, and then several people who could not be here today, including Isabir Ali and Barbara Tane. So we had women from each of these major geographical regions informing the research and guiding it, but we also had 28 of our members across those same regions who participated in the research. And those members were between the ages of 25 and 65, with a whole range of really interesting professional experience in peace building, mediation, and negotiation at all levels, from the local to the global. In terms of the methodology we used, we issued an online survey to our membership. We had just under 50 members at the time of the research, and so we had a strong response to that survey. We had over half of our membership complete it. We also conducted structured interviews and a semi-structured focus group to gather our data. We also, because of the subject matter covered in this research, we also felt like it was very important for us to take a trauma-informed approach to our research. If any of you are interested in this, you can be in touch and we can give you much more detailed information on that. But just for the sake of brevity today, I'll say that we included a safeguarding process within our research and a thorough risk assessment of this research. Certainly, what would the benefits be of amplifying women's voices around psychosocial impact, but what would the risks be when we invite women to talk about the impact of their work? We know that that can bring up difficult memories or difficult sort of experience that they've had. And so we wanted to be really mindful of that. To help hold that space and to be more trauma-informed, we shared with each of the women who participated in the interviews or the focus groups some wellness-based tools and resources that they could use even during those interviews if they became distressed. And the researchers were all sort of skilled in those resiliency-based tools as well. So we offered to support the research participants if they became distressed during the research conversations. We also followed up with regional resources that they could find and use for their own support. And we also offered one-on-one support following the interviews if participants wanted to benefit from that. There were three major research outcomes, and Alicia's going to take us through the first two here in just a moment. What we discovered from the research is that women mediators definitely experience a very difficult personal impact sometimes through their work, and we're going to outline what that looks like. It's also important to note, though, that the women mediators that were participants in this research also showed tremendous professional resiliency. So despite this very heavy personal impact that they often carried with them, their work continued to thrive and to really be very strong, even in the face of that. And then in those conversations with the women who participated in the research, we also got some very concrete recommendations around what psychosocial support mechanisms, structures, and frameworks would benefit the women. And so we're going to share those with you now.
Thank you so much, Sara. So Sara has already mentioned that this research project originated from connecting with other practitioners in person and hearing their stories. And so storytelling is a huge piece of this research project. And you'll see throughout the document quite a few incredibly powerful quotes. And so I will share some of those with you today. So as Sara mentioned, the research examined the multitude of ways in which women practitioners are impacted by their work. And the results that we found indicate that women are kind of operating in the eye of the storm, so to speak. Not only are they overcoming gender-based barriers, but there are also factors around personal risk and a host of other repercussions that they experience in order to deliver the urgent supports that they do deliver on the front line in conflict zones. So as you can see here, 96% of women reported that their emotional well-being is moderately to very impacted. And some of those symptoms included feeling emotionally drained, fatigued or exhausted, having worry about their safety or loved ones' safety, or sleep, and impact on family. I'm going to delve into the sources of conflict here because this is where you get a lot of the nuances from women mediators and peace builders and some of those powerful quotes. So when looking at gender-based factors, as a male-dominated field, particularly at the international level and in high-profile negotiations, many women talked about the cultural barrier related to the perception of conflict as being men's work. Women shared that they would employ strategies such as ensuring that they had the most technical knowledge in any given area, that they had to exude asexuality, and they had to leverage different identities, such as their role as mothers. One participant noted that I found when working with senior government officials, it was sometimes troubling to be put in a situation where I felt or I thought, do I wield my power, my knowledge, and my skills gently, assertively, or do I have to do it quietly? Another participant spoke of the complexity of navigating their own emotional impacts and yearning for the freedom to wanting to express their authentic anger, but being worried that that would come off as being highly emotional or too emotional by their male colleagues. The next key impact was personal risk, and this is an incredibly powerful section of the report. Women reported receiving threats, such as experiencing physical assaults, experiencing sexual assaults, kidnapping of their children, their husband, the kidnapping of their staff, and the financial strain from having to pay large sums of ransom. And of course, this was all based on being a woman in the field. They spoke about traveling to remote regions, often having to trek, having to bike, having to take long car journeys, which involved incredible security threats. The respondents described being caught in crossfire and experiencing the dilemma of hearing shots or hearing blasts or explosions and having to decide, do we persist? Do we continue on to reach the communities in need? Or do we turn back for our own personal safeties? One of the quotes is, sometimes we have to visit difficult and dangerous areas just to mediate and to get access in order to save lives. In between bullets, we have to move to the next area. I'm affected greatly, yet I have to be strong. There is a clear question for many women mediators as to whether those responsible for funding these processes take the security of women mediators and peace builders into account as robustly as they could or should. The next source of impact was sexual harassment. So though sexual harassment was not directly asked about in the survey questions or in the interviews that we had, research participants continually brought this up in their comments. They shared instances of sexualized comments, sexual approaches, and work-related progression being tied to sexual dynamics. They reported that the decision-making, their own decision-making and the emotional labor that came with this impacted their ability to really focus on their work, and that some of the coercion at play impacted the choices that they made in regards to work. So wounded healers, this terminology of wounded healers actually came from one of the participants, as she described it as doing this work at the expense of themselves and at the expense of their immediate families. So this piece really highlights secondary trauma as a factor for many women mediators and peace builders working in conflict zones, where there might be really high levels of violence or trauma for civilian populations. One of the quotes was, helping to absorb the suffering of others, to be the bridge to translate their needs to others has an impact on me. So Sara, next slide. Thank you. So professional resilience. So despite the constellation of disruptive factors and the profound personal impacts that women mediators experience, they continue to be professionally resilient. 86% of women reported that their behavior was either not impacted at all or moderately impacted by their work. 75% reported that the overall social impact of their work infrequently, or psychosocial impact of their work infrequently impedes how they engage in their mediation and peace building work. So this indicates a profound professional resilience amongst women mediators and peace builders. Women continue to deliver exceptional professional outputs while coping with the difficult personal impacts that I just highlighted. So when we look at resilience factors, one was work as a balancing factor. So participants spoke about positive experience of the work as counteracting some of those negative experiences. This work brings them respect in their communities, it amplifies their voice, factors which were particularly important for women who were living in really patriarchal societies with less visibility of women in leadership roles. One quote was that this work is mainly about saving lives, which is not a small thing, it's a big thing. So the whole idea of saving lives and preventing conflict gives enormous satisfaction and happiness to me doing this work. It also instills confidence in me. The next factor, gender as a catalyst. Women describe their gender as a source of strength, noting their ability to withstand adversity. Their unwavering belief in conflict transformation drives their professional resilience. Coping and self-care. To support their well-being, the majority of respondents do debrief with other practitioners. They draw support from their family, from their friends, and they talked about an array of different ways of actively engaging in a healthy lifestyle to support their own well-being. It was interesting that 90% of respondents reported that they provide psychosocial support to the people that they work with. So whether that be through facilitated discussions, education and training, peer support, wellness-based skills, counseling, they are providing that support. The question is, are they receiving it? Professional resilience. So one respondent described the profession as follows. We are like emergency room doctors, pushing ahead because the work has to get done. Participants refer to the urgency of their work and the reality that we can't turn a deaf ear or blind eyes. If we do not intervene, it just leads to more bloodshed. And finally, collaboration with other women. Participants cited opportunities to co-mediate with other women practitioners as a factor that could really strengthen and sustain their work and support each other. The value of connecting with other women mediators was really emphasized. And the role of women mediator networks, of course, is crucial in providing this opportunity for collaboration and connection. So the women mediator networks focus on providing women with the networking, the mentoring, the capacity building, advocacy and deployment opportunities, and of course, that sisterhood that we all talk about within the networks. One final quote to share is, my participation in women mediators across the Commonwealth and in broader WPS initiatives has provided me with a feeling of solidarity with other women practitioners that has resulted in enhanced personal well-being, as well as greater opportunities for international collaboration and practice.
Thank you so much for that, Alicia. We want to also share with you the final category of insights and outcomes from this report. And this was just some very, very practical recommendations from the women who we interviewed as a part of the research around what psychosocial support structures might be of use to them. So 98% of survey respondents said that adequate psychosocial support would enable their mediation practice to be more effective or somewhat more effective. And interestingly, the women named a huge array of different types of psychosocial support that would be useful. We've only been able to share the top categories here, but you can look into the research to see some of the other insights that emerged. 82% of the women who participated in the survey said that participation in some sort of support or debriefing forum would be incredibly helpful to them. And they suggested that these fora would be very consistently offered and available in a scheduled way. Women also mentioned that they really would appreciate training on trauma and resilience. So the WMC has offered trauma-informed and resiliency-focused mediation training within our membership for our mediators and peace builders. So people are already very proficient at mediation and peace building activity, but one of the deficits that people noted is not necessarily knowing how to support people when trauma reactions showed up within a mediation or peace building process. And so we offered that training to our membership and had hugely positive feedback from that. And women are asking for more. They're saying we need to know more about what to do around the table when some of these strong impacts show up for the parties who are involved in a mediation. People also mentioned that it would be really helpful just to have an acknowledgement of their needs. So they were saying if governments, INGOs, other WPS actors would be able to acknowledge the fact that psychosocial impact is a reality for women peace builders, and then to work together to create systems of support and infrastructures that would allow women to gain that support when they have been impacted in a very difficult way. Women said that this would go such a long way, this acknowledgement, this building of something new in terms of support would go a tremendously long way in really helping them to address some of these more difficult impacts from their work. Women also asked for expert-led group retreats. So some of the women had had access to this experience of going away to a very kind of safe space with other women practitioners and led by experts who could help them better understand their experience and gain strength to continue their work in a really focused way. People also said that counseling or clinical support would be very useful to them. And then finally, 50% said that stress reduction techniques, just learning very simple tools to reduce or manage their stress impact while facilitating or mediating, and also after those processes, would be incredibly helpful. So what emerged from these recommendations from the women were several key areas of recommendations that we've included in the report. And these recommendations are primarily focused at governments, INGOs, WPS actors as a whole, and the women mediator networks, the regional women mediator networks. So very clearly what we were hearing from the women and what we've recommended in the report is to create new infrastructures of support for psychosocial support for women mediators and peace builders. So really mainstreaming some of these structures, funding them, making it a very common practice to talk about the need for psychosocial support and to be able to access that in a way that's easy and accessible was really important to the women that we worked with. And so we've made some very concrete recommendations for how we can start to mainstream psychosocial support for women mediators and peace builders as a very practical way to enact 1325 and to really allow women to participate more robustly in peace building and mediation activity. People also ask, of course, for safe spaces and peer support. So what was fascinating is only 50% of the respondents of the research actually said that they know of a place where women mediators and peace builders can access psychosocial support or peer support. And so women were very much saying that this would be really helpful to them in gaining that support. Again, psychoeducation and training, that very basic education around understanding stress and trauma, how it shows up for us when we've experienced human adversity. Women were saying this would be really helpful. It would enhance their practice. They would be stronger, more effective mediators when they knew how to support people who might be experiencing a stress or trauma response response in the midst of a mediation or peace building process. So 89% of respondents believe that their work would be enhanced if they could receive some of that psychoeducation and training in that area. Counseling and therapeutic support, of course, was mentioned by 50% of the respondents as important, but women were specifically saying, we would really like to have specific support provided by counselors and therapists and clinicians who understand what it's like to be a woman mediator or peace builder. So women were saying that sometimes when they'd access clinical support, it wasn't always fit for purpose. So really inviting the women, peace and security sector to start to think about how can we equip more therapists and clinicians who have an understanding of the rigors of peace building and mediation work, particularly as experienced by women practitioners. We also, of course, were hearing very much from research participants of the importance of advocacy and research. We could say so much about that. We encourage you to go to the report to get more information. But it's important to say that if we do start to create more structures of support for women mediators and peace builders and really begin to create frameworks of psychosocial support, we need to look at the efficacy of these. So we need to do more research to see what needs to be implemented, and once it is, how the implementation of some of these new systems of support positively affects women mediators and peace builders and allows them to flourish in their practice. Prevention was a very key area with some very concrete recommendations. Women who participated in the research really asked that we create some trauma-informed conflict analysis so that people understand as they move into a new space to do new mediation or peace-building work, to understand what that conflict analysis is in its detail, but also really looking at that through a trauma-informed lens and a gender-sensitive lens as well. So really looking at laying the groundwork in a strategic way before we send women into situations of conflict to mediate. People also talked about the need for pre-deployment briefings. So helping to really have that space for women mediators and peace builders to kind of think through what they're entering into and to prepare for that as well as possible. Post-deployment briefings or debriefings were also recommended, particularly so that women could begin to kind of process and maybe lay aside some of the very difficult things that they'll see and hear when they're in the field working on peace-building processes. And then finally, sexual harassment prevention was a key part of prevention. And we have some very sort of key recommendations in this area that you can see a little bit more in the report. I'll finish by saying financial support is going to be really key to all of this. So if we're going to mainstream psychosocial support and create these new structures of support for women mediators and peace builders, we will need the financial support to do that. So we're calling on governments, INGOs, and other WPS actors really to prioritize funding for some of this important work over the next few years. So I'll let you read this quote as we finish. And I have to say, Alicia shared some beautiful quotes from the research. One of the most challenging things for us as a research team was figuring out how to keep this report to a reasonable length. There was such amazing content that came from these women, and we wish that we could share it all. Much of it we can't share because some of it was very hard to read and very hard to hear because of the deep impact that women carry from these processes. But so much of what we've been able to include in the report is really uplifting, really strengthening, gives a very, very good sense of both the way that women are impacted and also the way that women are really continuing to stay strong despite that impact. So really encourage you to read the report and the executive summary. And for those of you who are going to be skimming through the report today because of your schedule, please do even just take a moment to read some of those quotes from the women. They're very clearly identified in the body of the report. You'll get a real sense of the spirit of the women and what was shared during the research process. So in conclusion, I'm about to pass over to Alicia so you can hear from members of the research panel and some of the members of women mediators across the Commonwealth who supported the research very strongly. But we want to share a couple of contact pieces of information for you. So please feel free to be in touch with women mediators across the Commonwealth as a whole. And please also feel free to be in touch with Alicia and I. We can share information and insights with the rest of the research team, but we're very happy to continue to provide more information and to share even more widely from beyond the report some of the really interesting elements of the research that emerged. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it over to Alicia and to the panel now.
So we're now going to have a panel discussion with 4 WMC members who provided support to this research project. So we have Elizabeth Solomon from Trinidad and Tobago, Atia Anwer Zoon from Kashmir, Betty Bigombe from Uganda, and Sanam Naraghi Anderlini, who is British Iranian. Friends, we are among greatness today, as these women are and have spent their careers working behind the scenes, mediating, negotiating, and creating true change in conflict zones around the world. Each speaker will have approximately 5 minutes to share their insights on the significance of this research project. Our first speaker is Elizabeth Solomon. Elizabeth is the Assistant Secretary General for the Caribbean Community Secretariat with responsibility for the Directorate of Foreign and Community Relations. She is an experienced mediator with more than 30 years of foreign service in senior level positions within the United Nations. Elizabeth, can you share with us why this research is so important, and what are some of the ways you have seen women mediators navigate and be resilient to the psychosocial impacts of peace building?
Thank you, Alicia, and it's really good to see some of my colleagues on this panel, whom I haven't seen for quite some time, and welcome to everybody who's joined. So why is the research so important? I think that this, in fact, was the missing link in the implementation of Resolution 1325. 1325 has had quite a profound impact over the years in improving the space for women mediators to do the work that they have always done, and ensuring that they get the recognition that not just they deserve, but also by recognizing the work that they do, women mediators can be more effective, of course. Despite the improvements brought about by Resolution 1325 and the subsequent resolutions, of course, what has always been missing is an understanding of the impact of conflict and peace building work on women. I think it's fair to say that peace building and conflict prevention and mediation work is challenging for all genders. It is hard work, it is emotionally draining and physically taxing. It is work that requires immense patience and a deep dedication to the plight of others, including those who choose to engage in conflict violently. But for women, it is even more challenging. And I say that without fear of any contradiction. Women have to work harder within their organizations and with their interlocutors to gain recognition, to achieve the level of gravitas as a mediator that people are looking for in the peace building environment. Women are still having to overcome the systemic and societal expectations that link legitimacy and expertise to their gender. Frankly, these views persist. I see it every day in the conflicts that I work on currently. And I'm stunned by the lengths that some will go to sideline the participation of women in peace processes. Women are forced to find strategies to deal with sexual harassment. Let's not forget that. Women mediators are at greater danger in conflict contexts because they're perceived differently, as easy targets. And yet women persist, even as they also bring up their children, support their households, and support each other. So this research has provided a deep analysis of how women go about overcoming those challenges and the impact that that has on them. And importantly, what they believe would be best to support them through these processes. It's also very important to point out that this research is a lived experience. The data collection and the analysis has been carried out by women mediators and peace builders with immense collective experience in the subject matter. It is also a uniquely diverse study which reflects the core identity of the women mediators across the Commonwealth. What this research points to is that women mediators cannot be effectively and safely deployed without a framework that recognizes the specific challenges that women mediators must overcome to do their work. It is a fundamental responsibility of policymakers and funders to normalize the inclusion of protection and psychosocial support for the women who form part of any peace-building initiative. It is critical that in the inclusion of women's protection and support, that does not appear to be burdensome or a deterrent to the deployment of women mediators. It is part of what has to happen for women to be deployed. And as a result of this research, women mediators can become more confident and empowered, and as a result, even more effective. Interlocutors who understand the boundaries and also gain respect for women mediators will respect them more easily. Women mediators can develop different and more productive relationships with their interlocutors. Women mediators with the appropriate protection and support can more easily embrace a nurturing role within their work, which has the immense potential for more peaceful dialogue. Women, hopefully, will be seen differently. They'll be heard differently and more respected. Hopefully, more women will put themselves forward to engage in peace-building work, because I'm aware that there is a dearth of women at this level. And I will say no more about that. But I've also been asked to identify some of the ways that I have seen women mediators plot their way around these hurdles, and what strategies do they develop to steel themselves to keep going. The first thing I'd like to point out is that, in my experience, women mediators are not faint-hearted. They very rarely throw in the towel and say, this is too hard for me. That is not an option that surfaces easily. However, I have seen women suffer immeasurably in this field of work, where they have been underprotected by the organizations that they work for, when the system has essentially abandoned them in extremely traumatic circumstances. I've had colleagues with night terrors and colleagues who, suffering from sheer burnout, have been medically discharged rather than provide the support that was needed. There are a myriad of ways that women mediators navigate and develop a resilience to the psychosocial impact of peace building. Chief among them, I would imagine, is women's ability to operate with multiple identities. You're a woman amongst your sisters, you're a mother, you're a wife, you're a peace building practitioner, just to name a few. Women mediators develop strategies to engage nonetheless by redefining their identities to suit the context. We have to ask ourselves, how will I be perceived if I say this? Or if I demonstrate my expertise? Or if I say something that is not the general consensus at the male-dominated table? We have to ask ourselves, what impact is my being a woman going to have on what I'm trying to achieve in this particular negotiation? This is an exhausting process. The challenges are very identity, every day, every hour. My first role as a mediator was working with police officers as in a multi-ethnic post-conflict context, in which I was required, or I felt that I was required, to be as capable as the male police officers with whom I had to engage. And I'm not a police officer. I have never been a police officer. Yet, I felt that in every aspect of their role as a police officer, I had to be able to demonstrate that I was competent. And it was a highly tense and male-driven environment. And I had to prove that I could pass their test of legitimacy. I chose, in that context, to use the questions that they asked of me about my identity as a starting point of a trust-building conversation. And that worked for me. But I mention this as a round off, just to say that women are required to redefine themselves in ways that other peace builders are not. And that puts you into a far more vulnerable position. It also challenges you, it's exhausting, it sometimes doesn't work. So that you are always in a position as a woman mediator, if you do not have a framework in which to work that you can rely on, that you can know that you're safe, and that you are seen for the work that you do within your gender by your peers and by your interlocutors. I think that this is a critical aspect of where this research can inform the work that we do and the people that fund it and the organizations in which we operate. I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. That was so beautifully said. We appreciate your time. Atia Anwer Zoon is the director of the Kashmir Institute for International Relations Women Wing. She has 15 years of peace-building experience, bridging both grassroots and academic communities in Azad, Jammu, and Kashmir. She has a PhD in English linguistics, focusing on working women negotiating multiple identities in conflict settings. Atia, as an experienced researcher and peace builder, what was it like for you being part of this research project, and how might shining a light on psychosocial impacts and the recommendations foster increased participation of women mediators and peace builders?
Thank you, Alicia, for posing this question to me. I think the answer to this question is very close to my heart. Being a researcher, it was completely different experience for me, being on the other side of the fence and not telling my story but listening to stories of other women, being an insider also who has experienced almost the same primary and secondary trauma, being working in the conflict zone for past 1.5 decade, and now being listener to those who are sharing their experience. And the most important thing that stood out for me while listening to their stories, that how powerful a tool this storytelling is and what impact it can have on your listeners, and what aspects of lived experience can these stories bring bring to light. And agreeing to Elizabeth that being females and being mediators in the peace building spaces, we already reach here after defying a lot of challenges that are related to our gender, because some of us operate in patriarchal settings and there are cultural barriers, and we have to put in some extra efforts to build trust with the communities, to gain that level of acceptance, and to prove ourselves as being capable of doing this work, maybe because of that traditional occupation of these spaces by male, and these spaces being male dominated, the perception is that conflict resolution and mediation and these are things for men to do. So it takes a lot of effort to get accepted. So once you defy all these barriers and you are there out there and you are present as mediators, for a moment you might have a sigh of relief that okay, you managed to be in the field and now you can make the difference. But then the challenges that you are faced with and the trauma that of course that comes, the risk factors are associated with the very fact that you are operating in the conflict regions. So when we were interviewing some of the participants for this research, and these powerful stories of these stories were very intense when they were talking about the primary trauma, because these are the women, at times they are engaging with difficult actors, with the tribal leaders, with the paramilitary forces, with separatist groups. So there are a lot of risk factors involved. It can be threat to your life, to your family, to the fear of physical assaults, sexual assaults are always there, and some of them have reported personally experiencing those threats. And sometimes they had to go into the violent regions where violence is quite active, and they are either, as you mentioned in the opening discussion, that they are being caught in the crossfire when shelling is going on, blasts are going on, their personal safety is as risks. So all these primary threats that they are facing, they cause trauma. And at the same time, when you are working with people who are affected by conflict and who share their intense stories of personal losses, having lost near and dear ones to violence, your children, your spouse, or living in fear in your everyday lives. This also brings the secondary trauma in terms of having an impact on your mental health, emotional stress, and there are so many symptoms of trauma that sometimes even being part of this process for years, sometimes we may not be able to identify these symptoms, that these symptoms are caused by maybe deep down trauma that we are having because of the work that we are engaged in. So I think this whole process and this whole tool of storytelling for bringing in the perspectives of women on the psychological impacts has been very enlightening for me as a researcher, and I'm sure for most of us it has been a very, at the same time, empowering experience also, that you are not alone in this sport. There are all these women who are operating in difficult context. They are also going through the same the experiences of trauma, but at the same time it's very encouraging to and very empowering to listen to their stories of resilience, that what kind of coping mechanisms do they engage in order to maintain their personal and emotional well-being. But these mechanisms most of the time, as shared by these women, are not structured, are not formalized structures. They are quite informal, either seeking help from the family members, or debriefing with other women practitioners, or practicing yoga exercises or other meditation activities. They are not that well structured. So the second part of the question that you raised, that whether highlighting this aspect of the psychological impact would foster engagement of women, I think it's critical in not just enhancing but ensuring the sustainability of the work that women are doing. That if you have the structured psychosocial support structures in place for where these women peace builders and mediators can resort to, I think that would encourage and that would ensure a long-term engagement and effectiveness of their work also. And I think they would also have spaces where they can regain their strength, where they can rebuild themselves and again prepare themselves to go back to the fields and get that long-term resilience, professional resilience, to again go back to those challenging contexts and operate as mediators and peace builders. And at the same time, they are very crucial in mitigating the negative impact of this primary and secondary trauma on women peace builders and practitioners, and the personal well-being of these women mediators and peace builders is extremely important if we are talking about enhancing the role in participation of women within the WPS programs, because there, there might be times when these informal structures are sufficient for them to gain that resilience. But of course, we are human beings and we are not always in that state of inner strength where this some sort of temporary, unreliable structures would be always enough to console our well-being. So I think if these structures are in place, they would ensure more long-term engagement of women, and they are crucial in so the and there's one thing that is important that I would also like to highlight in terms of having
Tia,
formal
I'll just say
social.
if you could add it briefly because we've got to move forward.
Just one last comment.
Thank you.
That if for sometimes even for us being so experienced and being in the field for a long time, it's not sometimes we may not be able to identify the symptoms that even we may be showing, the depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, fatigue, there's so many physical and emotional symptoms that we may not be able to identify. So if we have proper structured trainings and clinical support and experts, access to experts, we may also be able to be able to timely identify these symptoms and be able to cure and seek help in the timely manner. So I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atia. Our next speaker, Betty Bigombe, is Uganda's Ambassador High Commissioner to Malaysia, a former Minister of State for Northern Uganda, and has held high diplomatic positions at the World Bank. She was recently awarded an honorary PhD in laws by the oldest university in Uganda. Betty, a two-part question. What psychosocial supports are currently available to women mediators? And from you and your colleagues' experience, particularly in your region, how do the various psychosocial obstacles hinder women from engaging in the work?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Greetings to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, morning, afternoon, and it's evening out here. Well, first and foremost, I would like to really congratulate the team for a very wonderful job done. This is a very powerful testimony on the importance of making psychosocial support relevant in peacemaking effort for women. It's a very clear, strong message that brings out of this. And I really hope that you will produce a handbook as a result of this to be used by policymakers as well as funding agencies to realize what it means to be a woman in the middle of conflict and trying to end that conflict. The stress, it all comes out very clearly. The only thing that I did not hear where women need protection from is spoilers. In every peacemaking process, usually there's competition for resources, but competition to play a role. Everybody wants to be part of the process. And consequently, as a woman, you face more spoilers than anybody else because women are scrutinized more in what they're doing. They're looking for faults. They're not looking for the credit that the woman brings in the process, but rather looking for faults. And women are usually very scared of losing in the process. If I can remember before I answer your question, my own experience where we almost reached, this is way back in the 90s, reached a point of signing a peace agreement, and suddenly, because spoilers came in, interfered, and cancelled. I was so lonely, nobody realized the psychosocial, the trauma I was undergoing. It was from the time that everybody wants a piece of you to where people switch off and you take it personally and you're very lonely. You question, you think you went wrong somewhere, but it's all because of spoilers. So protection from spoilers is very important as far as women are concerned in this process. Now, coming to your question, whether there's any kind of psychosocial support currently available for women mediators in Africa, I will say that, first of all, trauma, depression, and the likes are really not treated as serious problems in Africa, and particularly to women. So you are left on your own to deal with the problem. And that is why I'm saying that with this kind of what this report, what it has come out with, it is very important to publicize it and make it into, if possible, a handbook where policymakers can read. So do the funding agencies to realize the importance of it. Because dealing with conflict, you're not dealing with anything pleasant at any one time. It is deaths, it is destruction, it is people who are wounded, people come wailing, looking for consolation from you as a peacemaker, and yet you cannot offer that. And so you are hearing all this problem. I still remember one time when I really did not, it's not like now that I can take wine, but in the past, I didn't take any alcohol, that after some time, it became so heavy on me, excuse me, that I started looking for alcohol to drink, to kill my nerves, because I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. It was just, I was just totally overwhelmed with what was going on a daily basis. But nobody thinks of the burden you're carrying as a person, as a woman, in that process. I've also seen women whose husbands have walked out on them, because why do you venture into this field, which is a male domain, and you're just a woman, why do you venture in here? And so I've seen men walk out on their women because they're trying to bring peace, or they're trying to mediate in conflict. So they also need that kind of protection, that, you know, when you don't have your family, that family support that you desperately need in a situation like this, that it is given by people who understand what it is to be in conflict. So at the moment, I would say in my region, no support is being given. Consequently, we did some research not too long ago. The level of mental health has gone up, especially for women in particular, who've been involved in bringing peace because of what they're faced with, and what the life they live, what they're confronted with on a daily basis. Like I said, conflict is not a nice thing to deal with, because there's no good news at any one time. It is always bad news. So consequently, we found that the rate of mental health percentage had gone up so much. The same with suicide. This is because there's no support, psychosocial support to women. So rate of suicide went up in the area where war was raging. The rate of mental health had gone up, and dominantly women, because they're traumatized, nobody treats it, nobody thinks it's a serious problem. And sometimes they even think, why do you feel sad? Why don't you push it behind you and pick up the pieces of your life? So it is a problem, and this is something that this work that the team has just completed means a lot, especially for we women in Africa. We're trying to deal with conflict situations that is done. Training is an important part and parcel of this. Training so that when you go into this area, at least you have, there's nothing better than practicing it yourself, but at least preparing you to what to expect when you're going into this area. You should know that you're not going for a party. You're going in for a very difficult, and what could easily happen to you in the process of bringing peace. So training should be a parcel of it, or at least preparing you. I still remember some time back, this was when I was doing some work for UNDP in conflict areas. Is that
Betty, sorry to interrupt. I'll ask if you can share this one last story, and then we'll head into Sanam's presentation.
Yeah. That you knew that if you meet child soldiers, they're deadly. If you meet women combatants, they're deadly. It's because they're trying to prove their mettle. So this kind of training that to prepare you what to expect is very important. Number two, there should be funding available easily for women in need. This is usually a big problem, to get some kind of funds to be able to do your work and do it properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Betty.
Yeah.
Sanam Naraghi Anderlini is the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network with over 30 years of peacebuilding experience. She leads the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership in 40 countries and established the Innovative Peace Fund. As a key drafter of the seminal UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, Sanam brings a wealth of experience and heart to this topic. The one other piece I want to add is earlier Sara mentioned that 50% of women said in the research that they knew where to access some support. That support was provided by Sanam's foundation, ICANN. Sanam, what is important for policymakers, funders, and WPS actors to understand about the personal psychosocial impacts experienced by women mediators and peacebuilders? And what psychosocial supports would you most like to see implemented?
Thank you, everyone. I'm already feeling very emotional having heard both my colleagues speak and also the results that you just mentioned. I wanted to just maybe in the 5 minutes that I have, frame it around the 3 levels of work that I've been in and just kind of give you what I see. So there's the personal, and then my own experience and what I see in terms of as individuals we experience. There's the organizational, when you run an organization and what that means when you have staff and you're dealing with your staff on the one hand, but also with donors and what that entails. And then the experiences that we've had and some of the recommendations that we have coming from our network, the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership. So I'll start with a personal. I was 28, 29 years old when I stepped into this field of work. And I was immediately exposed to reading some of the most traumatic reports from the Human Rights Unit about the rape camps in Bosnia. And the things that I read at that time have stayed with me. There are things that I cannot unknow. Nobody had prepared me for what I was going to become exposed to. And then I was working in an organization, and my office mate had just survived a genocide in Rwanda. And we were working on Burundi, and in Burundi, 50,000 people were getting killed and people were landing in ditches night after night. I was 28 years old. No one had explained, nobody was there to say, you're going to have nightmares, you're going to have trauma, you're going to feel completely dissociated from everything that is around you, from all of your friends, from all of your family, because they're speaking about whatever's going on in London. I was living in London at the time, and your head is experiencing what we now know to be vicarious trauma. So I say this because as people come into this field, we still haven't figured out, how do you prepare them for what they're going to be exposed to that is out in the world, and yet it's not really part of what we are on a daily life living with when we're dealing with our families. And what it does to you is it creates cracks in your heart, and it kind of embeds trauma in your soul. It's very hard to explain this, except if you've been in the situation that I'm talking about, when you're constantly thinking, what's happening in Gaza today? What about my colleagues in Afghanistan? What about Sudan? What about my colleague who lost a son and then a second son? And these are things that don't go away. They become a part of our own stories, but we don't have a way of coping with them, really. And there's an expectation for those of us who are working internationally to be the calm in the eye of the storm, right? You're the emergency room doctor. You can't. I sit in a privileged position. It's not my job to be completely traumatized about what's happening in Gaza. I have to be the one who can be calm and think and say, what are we going to do about it, right? But you're absorbing the pain of others, and we haven't learned how to then deal with that absorption. And I think that as our colleagues, as Betty was saying and others were saying, sometimes people end up taking drastic measures just to cope, but it's not really recognized. And I just want to put that there on what it means. As the head of an organization, it is unbelievably hard, and you question yourself all the time because you're exposing your team to these things. When the Afghan crisis happened, I made the decision that we were going to help our Afghan colleagues evacuate and resettle and do whatever was needed to help make them safe, Afghan women. My team was young, or it doesn't matter what age they were. I had people who work with me who've been in this field for 15, 20 years, and I had younger people as well. 24/7, we were receiving calls and pleas for help, right? And the reason why I made the decision to say we're going to do what we can was because I was thinking, if we don't respond for the next 5, 10, 15 years, people are going to be thinking, maybe I could have done something, maybe I could have helped someone and I didn't. So you're living either with the guilt of inaction or with the trauma of action, right? And again, there's no one there to help you other than yourself and your community of practice. And then the third part of this as an organization, again, is sitting internationally, and I'm sorry if we have any government folks here with us, but bear with me when I say the hypocrisy of our governments, the inhumanity of the individual bureaucrats that we have to deal with, whether it's for funding, whether it's for permission to allow a Palestinian partner to allocate 10% of their money to do some humanitarian work, right? And the inhumanity of the bureaucracy that we have to deal with, that eats into your soul. I mean, that part is even more depressing and more traumatic than all the others, because you're thinking you could do something and you're not, right? So these are the three levels at which we as organizations and as individuals, we deal with this. Now, what is it that we want governments to do? What do we want policymakers to do? First of all, don't make our life more difficult. And by that, I mean, number one is recognize and respect that the vocation of peacebuilding, the vocation of being a mediator in the middle of a conflict, is unbelievably difficult, whether you're sitting where Betty is or Elizabeth is or I am or our colleague Atia is. This is unbelievably difficult, complex, intellectual, emotional work that we're taking on. So recognize and respect it for what it is. Don't force us to prove ourselves year in, year out, right? Second, support our networks and alliances, because the only reason why any of us are still standing is because we have a community of practice that we've created for ourselves. And those networks and alliances need to be nourished and they need to be enabled. And that does mean funding. It does mean enabling organizations to survive, investing in the trust that they already have, investing in our collaborative coming together and so forth. But allow us to have our networks to work, and allow us to be able to have the resources and the flexibility to fund as needed, and trust our judgment on these things. Third is the ICANN, through the WASL network, we had 3 years of consultations and developed the Protecting Women Peacebuilders report and guideline and framework. The UK government has taken this up as part of their implementation of their National Action Plan. Please implement, because it's got everything in it. It's got everything from emergency response to in-country response and so forth. There are a lot of very practical recommendations that we've already developed. And it would be great to see other countries take this on. Related to that is our partner in Colombia, SIACE, has developed it's been a 5-year process. It's a self-assessment tool for peace actors and civic actors. It's called Secure Here and Now. Again, it's indicators that come from women, it's solutions that come from women, but the tool itself needs to be supported so that we can share it widely and others can use it, and the protection measures can be there. And then a few other things. As part of the support that we have, funding for psychosocial therapy for activists, I think, is necessary. The time away as sabbatical to be built into our work life. At the moment, I've had the privilege of getting a fellowship, and for the first time in 28 years, I'm taking a step away from my daily work. And I can't tell you how important that's been in terms of being able to see the distance, in terms of improving the way I look at things, but building that into our universe. And then for the more long-term things, I don't know any peace builder working internationally that knows what their retirement plan is or where their healthcare costs are coming from, right? Imagine that. Imagine that you don't know what's going to happen to you because you've dedicated your entire life to bettering other people's lives, but nobody gives a damn about actually what's going to happen to you. And I think that if governments are serious about supporting mediators, peace builders, etc., we should be thinking creatively about a health fund and a retirement fund and working with the finance institutions that can help provide that for us for wherever we are in the world, because of course they need to be safe and secure as well, given the fragility that we're thinking about. So these are some of the recommendations that I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Sanam, thank you so much to you, to Betty, to Atia and Elizabeth, and for our participants today. If people are interested and want to hear more stories, read the report, and it is filled with more stories and experiences and insights and recommendations from other members that we worked with. Quhramaana, I'm going to turn the virtual floor back over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sara and Alicia. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing your valuable insights and experiences, including some of the very difficult experiences with our participants today, affirming the need for psychosocial support for women mediators and peace builders as a necessary tool to address their well-being and to increase the impact and the effectiveness of their work in the field. I'm sure there will be more questions, but I will start with some of the ones in the chat box, and with a very interesting question actually that has been asked from all of the speakers, and it's about the intersecting identities such as race, ethnicity, class, and sexual orientation, the influence and availability of effectiveness of psychosocial support for women peace mediators, and what is the role of stigmatization and discrimination that plays in discouraging women mediators from seeking help for their mental health and psychological needs. I think it's a great question because sometimes women are prevented by certain stigmatization or I mean some of the areas where women, for example, in conflict affected countries are mostly, they do not come forward to seek support or help because they don't want to be stigmatized any further. So I think it's a great question to start with. I mean, any of our speakers can come in and respond to this from your experiences and what you've been hearing from women on the ground. Sanam?
Just very, very quickly. So what we've done in the ICANN and the WASL network over the years is that we've connected our partners to each other. So for example, we have the Neem Foundation, which is based out of Nigeria, and they do psychosocial counseling and therapy. And when the bombing happened in Somalia a few years back, our Somali partners were very traumatized. We connected them up with our partners from Neem, and they provided one-on-one online therapy for people. So first of all, it was within the context of understanding. I mean, again, Somalia is very different to Nigeria, but it was understanding what these kinds of issues are. And then secondly, there was the privacy element and allowing for people to just get online and do it and do it as they needed. We also developed an entire kind of actually tool and program that in partnership with Neem to share with our Syrian and Iraqi colleagues, because what we saw was that NGOs were often the first responders of people who'd been victims of torture and rape and so forth. And the NGO workers didn't know what to do. So we developed a whole training curricula on how to do almost like first aid version of psychosocial care and how you look after yourself, but also how you deal with people who are coming traumatized. So super tied to the context and being relevant to the cultural context and being developed in partnership with others who are coming from similar contexts. We haven't had the resources to be able to spread that widely, but we'd be very happy to try and do that if there is interest in that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanam. I think this would be very helpful for some of the participants who have already asked about available support in the regions. So ICANN is one credible source for that kind of support. I've also written in the chat box about the UN Women, Peace and Humanitarian Funds that also provides, psychosocial support and security support to women mediators and peace builders on the ground. The second question in the chat box is about mediators with disability. And the question is that if anybody has come across or worked with women mediators with disabilities, and if so, what are some of the ways they are coping and can be supported going forward? Betty?
Thank you. I actually wanted to supplement what on the question you asked was that although this is a long time ago and this was really a learning process, the psychosocial support that we did in Angola was a hybrid. That is, the people who were directly affected or who were involved in mediating within the community did not really perceive the Western concept of counseling. It did not have that real impact. And consequently, it was then a hybrid that of course brought in some rituals and what was recommended also in northern Uganda, some traditional practices that probably helped them understand more and probably come to terms with what they were going through. I just thought I would supplement that a bit.
Thank you so much, Betty. Does anyone else have any reflections on the two questions, particularly the disability question? Anyone from the floor, maybe a WMC member or somebody else who has been doing mediation and peace building, your experiences would be highly valuable. If not, then I'll go to the third question. I cannot see any hands raised at the moment. So I'll go to the third and final question that was posed in the chat box. And it is about what legal protection exists for women peace mediators in Commonwealth countries and Africa in particular, and how can their protection be strengthened to ensure their safety and security? Sanam just mentioned the support that ICANN provides. I mentioned about the support that is provided by UN Women. If there is anything else that colleagues, either the speakers or wider participants know about and would like to share with the participants, that would be great. Sanam, have you just raised your hand?
Yeah,
or? Okay.
just very quickly to say that we have been working quite hard and since 1919 to put the term women peace builders into the international policy framework. So we managed to get it into resolution, one of the WPS resolutions at the Security Council. We've worked on, we got it into a G7 resolution as well, because there was language about women's human rights defenders. But what we found in our work, and I think it's the same with this report, is that to be a peace builder or a mediator involves human rights, but it's also different because you're taking that middle ground space. And as we specifically wanted the recognition of mediators and peace builders, because mediator takes away the politics. It's as if you're impartial and there are two sides, whereas a peace builder actually means you have some vision of where you want your country to go. So understanding the nuances is really, really important. But making sure that these terms are in our international policy documents is also really critical. And so we do have it in Security Council resolutions now. And I think at the UN we met at also Human Rights Council and as I said the G7. But frankly, I can also tell you, so what? When Afghanistan happened, nobody came to help the women, peace builders, mediators, etc. We know that, right? So it's not so much, it's the recognition in those spaces, but then the implementation and the consciousness to actually be supporting.
Great, thank you so much, Sanam. I think that those were some really good notes to end the conversation on. I'll now turn to my colleague, Laura Aumeer from Conciliation Resources, who will now sum up for us some of the key discussion points. Laura, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Quhramaana. And I feel I have the unenviable task of trying to synthesize some of what we have heard over just under 90 minutes. And really, I wanted to kind of start by saying thank you to everyone who's spoken, who took part in this research, but also everyone who's listened today and reading the comments as well. Has been really some really kind of personal reflections shared, some other research and work being shared in the comments as well. And I think the first point I wanted to make, and that's really struck me over the session, is there's a lot within this research on and the main topic of it as well, obviously on the personal impact of peace building on women mediators and peace builders. And what I think really comes through the conversation today is how important this is. This is not just a piece of research that is, has some findings that will, stay down on paper and, we can see slight improvements if things are made, but actually just the impact of this on individuals, on organizations, on collections, and on all of us at the moment. It's been a really intensely personal and session, and I think that's important. We keep that in mind when we think about this topic. What does this mean for individuals, for colleagues that we're working with, and the wider peace building community as well? And Sanam spoke very helpfully on also looking at that from an organizational perspective, both the impact of seeing the work on individuals within an organization, but also the opportunities that organizations can do to address things as well. Betty and Atia spoke as well about the impacts they've seen on themselves and their colleagues that they work with at the same time. And I think what this overall in terms of a topic, and a phrase that I want to borrow from Elizabeth, which of the psychosocial support and the psychosocial impact on women mediators and peace builders being the missing link to 1325, of really how fundamental this is if we're talking about women's participation, if we're talking about the engagement of women mediators and peace builders. We can't forget and we can't ignore psychosocial impact of peace building on individuals, but also the importance of addressing that. And we've heard recommendations around funding, of what organizations can do and what donors and governments can do. And the report sets that out as well. There's recommendations in it for governments, INGOs, donors, mediator networks themselves. This is something we all have a responsibility to take forward and deal with. And seeing the different individuals on this call as well, I hope each of us will take that away from this call, go look in depth at the report, see what we need to be doing more, and how collectively we can address this issue. So I'll pause there, Quhramaana, and hand back over to you. But again, just say thank you for everyone's engagement so far.
Thank you so much, Laura. And with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers once again and participants for attending today's event and contributing to the discussions through your questions and reflections. For further information regarding the report, its findings and applications, please feel free to reach out to us. Sara has kindly shared with you the email addresses of hers and Alicia, as well as the WMC networks. We would be delighted to have further discussions and exchanges with you on this. Please also visit the WMC website, the members database, if you are looking for a peace mediator in contexts with diverse experiences and expertise. I'll now end today's event with a big thank you to everyone, and bye for now.